dying in your beds many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.tv. Thank you for joining me this evening, and let's go ahead and dive into these GOP debates. I don't know what everybody thought of them, but from what I could see, it doesn't show any true strong leaders, I don't believe. The people that are strong, they're egotistically strong, and there were a couple of points where Rand Paul stood out, but the problem is he's not able to show enough force to get through all the BS, the ratings bickering. That it might get good ratings, but it's not showing people that will truly, protect your freedom, your liberty, but more people that will use the fear to basically justify them taking rights away so they can protect you. And when Rand Paul, and even Ted Cruz, when Ted Cruz took a jab at the NSA bulk spying and Rubio attacked him and stuff about that, it's one of those things that as a libertarian, when you look at Ted Cruz, you go, well, this guy, there's certain points that, he's for, American citizens' freedom, but there's also points where he's, but, at points, we need to put up walls and stuff, and then, points that have been made is, walls are usually not only used against outsiders, but also used against the people within those walls. So you have to really play all the possibilities of how can this affect your freedom, your liberty. And even though Rand Paul, makes a lot of these points, it seems that people are buying into the fear. One thing I say about, Trump is that he feeds off of people's worst emotions. And when he speaks these, when he's spouting rhetoric that panders to the emotions of people in the worst way, he plays off of the fear and, we should pick that wall up. We should, stop all Muslims. No, because these aren't hitting at the right points. This is a very, very difficult time because we are in a catch-22 when it comes to immigration and then the threat, because you go, well, the border, if we allow Syrian refugees at all, then, you might get that one that's, yes, and we need to be, aware of that. It's already happening, whether you like it or not. But there are also a lot of those refugees that more than likely will outnumber the radicals that are just fleeing from all that war. They're looking to get away from it. The problem is we also have the police state building up more and more. So we're headed towards that direction because of the authoritarian overtake of America. And when you look at the debates last night, you look at all the bickering and the fear propaganda being pushed to further, we need bulk data collection because if we look back on history and go, because we didn't have it, we couldn't stop that person. But now also looking at the other side, because we had it, it was used to basically terrorize the population. We know that happens too. So you have to look at all sides of it if you truly want a free society. And most of these people don't. Let's go ahead and dive into a Ron Paul Livery report over the GOP debate. This one titled Fear One, Liberty Lost. So let's go ahead and cue that up.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, it's good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
I guess you stayed glued to your TV last night and watched all those debates, and you're now an expert in the political scene.
I did watch the debate, I have to say. Yes, I did.
I watched some, but it's pretty tough. But I got the gist of it, and I sort of sensed what was coming. And one headline that struck me today is the winner. Unfortunately, I thought Rand did pretty darn well, and he took a different position on foreign policy and personal liberties than the others, but nobody claimed he won, but nevertheless, he did well. The winner has been declared. Fear itself is winning, and it looks like the media is winning, the demagogues are winning, the politicians are winning, Donald Trump is winning. His polls keep going up. And at the beginning, Blitzer made the announcement that anything that doesn't relate to terror is not part of the program tonight. We want to talk about the real important things. So the whole world has a problem economically, and wars going on around the world, and we have Federal Reserve problems and all. But tonight, it has to be the fear of somebody attacking us, which is a very serious thing and something we've warned about for a long time. But it seems to me like the American people are disgusted. They don't like their government. The majority don't. And they're looking just for somebody to help them figure this all out. And so, unfortunately, instead of turning their attention to the government, I feel fearful, too. I'm fearful of our government. Because the more they talk about fear and the more they talk about change in definitions of collateral damage and things like this, I fear that our government is going to do us more harm. I sensed, as many freedom-loving people sensed after 9/11, that our greatest threat would come domestically, and that certainly has been the case. So fear is a driving force, and I'm sure that you've given that some thought.
Well, you know that as people tune out of the mainstream media, they tune away from CNN, they're desperate, I think, to hold readership. And selling fear is a very effective way of doing that. When people are afraid, they'll tune into CNN. They want to find out what's happening. So I think there are some ulterior motives here as well. People turn to the media, and politicians benefit from it too, because when people are afraid, they act irrationally. They look for protection in places. And I think there's definitely some other interest going on in pushing this idea.
You know, one of the complaints I've had is the Bush doctrine that we can initiate war, you know, this whole thing, preemptive war. And yet the other thing that they have talked about was, not unintended consequences, you know, the collateral damage.
Yeah.
Collateral damage. That's generally was considered bad, and they tried to hide it. But guys like Trump, especially, are saying that we need to change the definition. Collateral damage just is a way you win wars. So he says you should go to the families because they do care about their families. Can you think of anything more atrocious of that? Of course, going to war is pretty bad, but this whole idea of changing this whole the whole definition of a word and saying that collateral damage, I don't sweat it. You know, that's part of it, and that's the way you win war, because they're bad people and they love their families and they might pay attention to it. Never stopping to think that maybe there is a problem of retaliation for an attitude like that.
And there's also the problem of losing your moral compass. You know, I thought the real lowlight of the show last night, of the debate last night, and it really was disgusting, is when Hugh Hewitt, who's just one of the most repulsive neocons on earth, he turned to Ben Carson, the doctor, and he said, "Through your skills as a surgeon, you've saved a lot of children's lives. Would you have a problem slaughtering thousands of children overseas if necessary?" And he said, no problem at all. And I just can't believe we've come to this sort of horrific.
Well, that's a bipartisan attitude. Madeleine Albright showed no, compassion when they asked her about 500,000 children having died from our constant bombing in the 1990s, which led up to 9/11. She said, well, that's the price you have to pay. That's the price you have to pay. So that's that to me is an attitude, no moral compass whatsoever.
And Trump. We talked about this several shows ago. The idea of enabling acts, and I sort of got the sense when Trump was talking about we've got to kill the families, we've got to go after these families, and they said, why? Well, because our country's out of control. That's kind of a Reichstag thing, Our country's out of control. All the rules are thrown out the window.
Well, we're talking about the fear and the foreign policy and how does it affect us domestically. Well, we saw that this week, 2 days ago, or yesterday, where the LA schools were closed. And that was not a minor matter. Over 1,000 individual schools. They have 640,000 students, and they say, don't come to school. Well, some did come. Some stayed at home. How did they manage it? But a similar hoax was played on the New York schools, and they sort of paid attention, so they didn't chase everybody home. Which, in a way, you have to have a little bit of sympathy for people put in this position. But we have to realize that this is all concocted, and so much of the problems we have today with the threat of terrorism is preventable. But still, the overreactions, they've gotten, a few people in this world have gotten us so we're terribly frightened of our own shadow.
I think this may sound strange, but I think people take a sort of perverse pleasure in feeling that we're threatened, because it sort of spices up otherwise pretty dreary lives that a lot of people have. But I was looking at some of the comments on the New York City or the LA school district story, and I think this sort of captures everything right now. One of the commenters said, "It's awful and terrifying. I'm afraid it is going to be the new normal."
Yeah, the new normal. I know what that one is. But I read one comment of somebody that made more sense than the whole school district. And it was a 16-year-old that showed up at school, and I guess he didn't get the message soon enough. He shows up, so he goes up to a policeman, and the policeman tells him what's going on. And his main question, is this going to mess up my schedule for taking my exams? I mean, he was down to earth. He's coming to school to learn, take his tests, and get promoted and all. But no, we have to look at these big matters. But the consensus here, by most of the candidates, not all of them, except for the one, is that the purpose of government is only safety. And it bothers me. Yes, we should be safe, but maybe we can be safer in a free society. Maybe if you can freely own guns, you can feel safer when you live in your house. So safety is not the prime purpose of government. The prime purpose of government is to protect our liberties. But how often, I wonder how many times they even said that last night. Probably not many. It was always scaring people.
Yeah, I don't remember. Liberty was almost a 4-letter word last night, I think.
Right. And, the comparison, compared to what? That we have to be scared because 14 people were killed, which was a tragedy, which was, as far as I'm concerned, preventable, with certain changes in our policies, which is a horror. But does that mean we turn the world upside down and treat it like it was a nuclear bomb attack? And yet, this year already, our police, that's the government, shot 161 unarmed new suspects. So, but nobody seems to, well, there is some expression there, but in comparison, no. I mean, in comparison, this is a much, much bigger deal. But also the war in the cities, the war on drugs. How many people die from that? And it's preventable. Don't have this stupid federal war on drugs, which is, way out of control. And there's thousands that are killed there. There's, like in the inner cities now, there's close to 50 people die every night. So, in comparison, and it's day in, day out, morning to night, it's been saturated TV, and then CNN gets up there and say that's the only issue that's really important.
Because they've been shoving it down their throats for weeks and weeks.
But it's not important to talk about what is this principle of blowback? Could there be any truth to that? And do they get asked those questions? No way.
And, there's such an intellectual disconnect among most of the candidates because given the terrorist threat, what do they recommend above all? Do more that's causing the terrorist threat. And one of the articles pointed out, how can more attacks overseas make us safer at home? Nobody addresses that really.
And it actually, makes us less safe because, that's the motivating force. In the one guy, one of your favorite senators, and he's running for president by the name of Graham, he's out there, trying to get this balance. Most Muslims are good people, and we don't like the way Trump talks about them because that might anger the Muslims. And here's a neocon. How many years has he been doing it? A couple of decades, aggravating and precipitating war and saying we should be over there and doing more. And then he has the audacity, of course, what Trump does say does make it worse. But to think that Graham gets off scot-free and isn't a major participant in aggravation.
Yeah, it's okay to go ahead and kill them, but just don't say rude things about them.
That is it. That's what they want to do. But it looks like this is not going to change. And when I think back on this throughout my lifetime, there were times that were a lot more serious. Although I remember World War II, and I don't remember reading exactly about this, but we had Nazi submarines off our borders. And then in '63, when I was in the military, we had confrontation with the Soviets with missiles in Cuba. And there's been a lot of problems going on. We had, went through a Great Depression, and yet they want to say that what we're facing today, dealing with the threat of terrorism, is the biggest threat ever. And therefore, everything has to be directed to that, and we have to be willing to give up our liberty. And one of the most popular things I would say in the campaign, and get good applause from at least our college friends, is that you never have to sacrifice liberty for freedom. And yet the government and the politician always said, there is no other choice. You have to do it. You have to have either or. You cannot have liberty without the government, taking, you cannot be safe without the government taking away some of your liberty. I don't believe that is the case. I think if you have a system that's designed to protect liberty, we're going to be safer. We're certainly going to be a lot wealthier, and we're certainly going to have less friends. We're going to have certainly less wars if we understood that. But non-intervention in the three areas, non-intervention in the personal lives of individuals, non-intervention in the economy, and let voluntary associations work just as they do in social matters, and non-intervention in foreign policy, that's the road to peace and prosperity. It isn't, beating the drums of war and building up this fear and demagoguing the issue. And I blame two sources for this mostly. The flawed policy, of course. But the ones who beat the drums are the media, as well as the politicians who are trying to get an edge. Politicians last night were trying and begging and pleading and arguing to get an edge over how tough they would be no matter what kind of liberties they sacrificed. I hope the American people wake up and realize that is not the purpose of government. The purpose of government is to protect our freedom. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today, and please come back soon.
Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube, ronpaullibertyreport.com. Go check them out and watch the other videos. They put them out daily, covering multiple topics. So check them out, Ron Paul Liberty channel. Now, another thing, when it comes to this war on terror, and you have the creating by constantly being involved in the police. Of course, we're going to be a target. We are the enemy to those people when we are just constantly at war over there. But then it also affects us, and we see that with the, Patriot Act, the Freedom Act, and all this. But what happened last night at the debate, and it's starting to go mainstream finally, but it's about Ted Cruz, and here's one that I've got a whole bunch here, but I'll just cover this one here. NBC News. Did Ted Cruz reveal classified information at the GOP debate? The Senate Intelligence Committee now says that it is not formally investigating whether Ted Cruz may have revealed classified information when discussing the government's ability to monitor phone records during Tuesday night's Republican debate. The committee is not investigating anything said during last night's Republican presidential debate, the two top members of the panel said in a joint bipartisan statement. The statement comes after panel chairman Richard Burr told reporters this morning that he had directed his staff to look into the matter. I'm having my staff look at the transcripts of the debate right now, Burr told reporters this morning. Spokeswoman for Cruz said that the senator did not say anything that has not already been widely reported. There is nothing that Senator Cruz said last night that wasn't widely reported and saturated in the public domain, campaign spokeswoman Catherine Frazier told NBC News. Burr was initially referring to Cruz's comments regarding recent changes in the metadata collection program, which was the subject of a testy exchange between Cruz and Senator Marco Rubio, may have been classified. The old program covered 20% to 30% of phone numbers to search for terrorists. The new program covers nearly 100%, Cruz said. That gives us greater ability to stop acts of terrorism, and he knows that's the case. Rubio began his response to Cruz by saying, "Let me be very careful when answering this because I don't think national television in front of 15 million people is a place to discuss classified information." Rebecca Glover Watkins, who acts as a communications director for Chairman Burr, tweeted this just after the exchange. Cruz shouldn't have said that. Burr clarified what he did not see the exchange itself during last night's debate. "I didn't watch it. The voice was on," he said, adding it was final episode. And that was out at NBC News. But if they were investigating, what they would be investigating, showing that instead of the Freedom Act taking or getting rid of the bulk collection, it's actually increased it where it's just all. But I personally believe that it was more than likely all before. What Snowden's come out to say, it's not just metadata. They can, watch you, when they want. The ability's there to think that they don't abuse their abilities, I think would be absurd. Because when you give people power, they'll use it. That's why the concept of having power over others and that being acceptable in the psyche of the society is one of the major flaws. It's that we allow others to rule over us. We allow others to, put us in situations where we're defenseless. And that's a flaw in society everywhere. That's nothing unique to any certain country. It's something that we mentally have to evolve from. Otherwise, we do constantly, repeat history, and there are consequences when, the violent parts of history get repeated. But I think as a people, we do, each time we make those mistakes, it's harder for us to make those same mistakes up to a certain point, but it does happen. The problem is when we start getting to a point where we are in less control and we give up responsibility to even electronics to take care of things for us. We digress in a way that makes us more dependent. And that's what usually leads to this. Well, we got to spy a little bit because we can't protect ourselves. Guns are bad. What you say we need to take rights away so you can be defended by government, but then told government to take your, defenses away from you. Okay, you make absolutely no sense. But it's also what allows divide and conquer to work too. Because you're willing to fight over power grabs. Who's in control? Why is a flawed human being in control of you in the first place? Is the question we need to ask more. But I got an article here out of 10th Amendment Center. Get government out of marriage. New Hampshire bill would nullify both sides in practice. And, this is something that we've advocated for a long time, on Anti-Tyranny News Radio. And it's the whole thing of, freedom and government not being involved in personal things that we forget when you go, well, we got to call for government to write laws. Well, then when the next side gets empowered, they're going to write laws against you. And it just becomes a uphill battle that no one ends up winning. So this here out of 10th Amendment Center, Concord, New Hampshire, a bill has been filed in the New Hampshire State House that would end mandatory government licensing of marriages in the state, effectively nullifying in practice both major sides of the conscientious national debate over government-sanctioned marriage. HB 1596 acknowledges the right of two individuals to marry, and that because of this, it is improper for the government to license a right. The state of New Hampshire is compelled to return to the practice of certificate of notice of intent to marry and a certificate of marriage, which existed until 1997 and which provides interested parties the opportunity to object to a proposed marriage. The bill reads, instead of having to get a state marriage license, couples would provide a certificate of notice of intent to marry and a certificate of marriage. The certificate of notice would require the following. All persons proposing to be joined in marriage within the state shall place a notice of intent to marry in a newspaper not more than 90 days prior to nor less than 14 weeks prior to the date of marriage. The persons proposing to be married shall present the town clerk or either proposed spouse with a copy of the notice with all facts required by RSA 5C41 to be entered in a town clerk's office. The clerk shall record the notice in a book to be kept for that purpose and provide the parties proposing to marry with a certificate of notice of intent to marry. The marriage certificate would record that the marriage ceremony took place and records the person who solemnized the marriage. The certificate would be completed by the bridegroom and the officiant and the clerk of the town or city. The certificate would then be used to register the marriage. However, the bill also allows for individuals to be considered married without having to go through this process. Persons cohabiting and acknowledging each other as husband and wife and generally reputed to be such for the period of 3 years and until the decease of one of them shall thereafter be deemed to have been lawfully married. HB 1596 would accomplish two things. First, it would effectively render the edicts of federal judges that have overturned state laws defining marriage. The founding generation never envisioned unelected judges issuing ex cathedra pronouncements regarding the definition of social institutions like marriage. And the Constitution delegates the federal judiciary not authority to meddle in the issue. Marriage is a realm clearly left to the states and the people. You can read the rest of that at the 10th Amendment Center. But there are states out there that do have laws on the books that basically say 3, some say 5 years if you live with each other and consider each other husband and wife. I'm not sure, but I thought there was one that if you also, like, if you have children, it also affects, how long. Okay. When we look at what's going on in the Middle East right now with Syria, and Russia is basically stepped up, kind of decided, hey, I'm going to take care of this problem. The U.S. is doing nothing but destabilizing areas. I think it was a gesture to the world. Better pick sides, better pick them wisely, because Russia, China, they're creating alliances. They're shifting the world currency, and if you don't look at what's going on in the Middle East and the currency war together, you might not see the bigger picture. But there is definitely a power shift and a power struggle going on right now in the world, and it could have major effects. There might be a lot of people out there that see a lot of what Putin does and thinks it's great. Well, there's a lot that he probably does that is helpful for his country. But then there's also a lot of things he does that isn't freedom. It just seems the opposite direction of where we are headed. But I have We Are Change here. What you need to know about Russian warships firing on Turkey.
A Russian warship has just fired upon a NATO ally, and in this video we're going to give you all the facts, evidence, and little details that you can't get anywhere else, giving you a full global picture of the insane escalations happening between these two world powers that is slipping into utter chaos. Yesterday, a Russian warship fired warning shots at a Turkish fishing boat in order to prevent a collision. Now, of course, this incident may seem minor, but if you look at the global events that have been transpiring, you know that they have grave implications. This incident happened in the Aegean Sea, mainly because Russia, from the Black Sea, is using its ports to resupply its troops inside of Syria. Now, Russia does this by going directly through Istanbul. Turkey could at any time cut off this very important passageway, cutting off military supplies inside of Syria to Russia. This has not happened yet, but with these incidences that are happening all around this region, it could happen at any moment. Last week, we reported to you on wearechange.org how Turkey is now threatening Russia in response to what they're calling a provocation. Turkey is saying that a Russian serviceman who was going through Istanbul was spotted holding a rocket launcher on his shoulder as he was passing through that very important passageway that we have been talking about. As we're speaking now, the Russian Navy had to chase off Turkish vessels that were impeding their drilling platforms that they were moving in the Black Sea. Russia's two major rigs were being moved to a new location in the Black Sea when a Turkish vessel with a Turkish flag crossed the convoy's path, acting in violation of regulations for preventing collisions and against the general accepted conventions of navigation. The Turkish vessel failed to get out of the way of the convoy. It approached crossways and attempted to stop its course, thus creating potential for a collision. And they also cut off their radios and had radio silence during this incident. Russian vessels were sent in, no shots were fired. But as we know, if you have been studying history, especially incidences like the Gulf of Tonkin, we know that one small incident could spark off a global conflict and a full-out war between these two major superpowers. Turkey is saying its patience with Russia has a limit and it's coming to an end. This is creating a chaotic situation between these two countries and their relations. As we know, with Turkey being a part of U.S. and NATO, if there's a war between these two countries, the United States and NATO has to back Turkey in this conflict. This is a very dangerous situation, especially with Russia being as unpredictable and aggressive as they have been geopolitically. We know this incident is all transpiring because the Turkish government just a month ago shot down two Russian warships inside of its border. Russia is now responding, and as we're speaking right now, Russia is sending more aircraft inside of Turkey to conduct observation flights. This is happening now. Will Turkey shoot down this aircraft? We do not know. Will they escalate the situations more? We do not know. But Russia is not backing down in any way, shape, or form, and they're also deploying more missile systems, advanced missile systems that could be used to shoot down Turkish aircraft if their aircraft are threatened. Russia is resupplying a lot of its heavy military equipment inside of Syria, and they also are boosting their strategic nuclear forces in their country around the border regions close to NATO bases in that specific geopolitical region. Putin also made a statement recently saying, hopefully no nukes will be needed against ISIS. What Putin is saying more directly is, we have the capability to use nuclear weapons. Don't give us an excuse to NATO, Turkey, and the US. Don't do it. That's exactly the message that Putin is sending by giving this very important statement. As we know, if nuclear weapons did not exist, Russia's military is not as powerful as NATO's military, and Russia's military would lose. With nukes in the picture, Putin and Russia know that this is their trump card, and this is one way that they could win a possible war between these two major superpowers. Turkey also is in a losing position because Turkey is not energy independent at all. It relies on Russian imports of oil, and in 2013, Russia signed a deal with Turkey saying that they would build nuclear reactors. They have stopped building those nuclear reactors now. They have slowed down the process, putting Turkey in a very difficult situation, especially when economically they could be screwed over by Russia at any moment. Turkey has also been withdrawing some of its troops from inside of Iraq. Iraq has been shocked that Turkish troops have been fighting inside of Iraq, but now Turkey is withdrawing some of those troops. Iraq also is canceling their security agreement with the United States and are inviting Russia to fight alongside of them to get rid of ISIS in the country. As we know, and as we have reported to you, the Iraqis do not trust the Americans. They say the Americans are in cahoots with ISIS, especially when you look at the latest developments. Syria also is telling NATO to keep out of its country or they will get shot down. Because of Russia's new military systems, because of Russia arming the Syrian government, they now have the capabilities to do that. Now, why would Syria give NATO such a strong message saying that they're going to shoot down their aircraft? Well, let's look at what happened just on December 7th alone. On December 7th, the United States-led coalition bombed a Syrian military base in the east of its country, killing 3 soldiers, wounding at least 13, and destroying vehicles and equipment. This is the same Syrian military base that has been fighting against the rebels, that has been fighting against ISIS. The United States bombed this base. That's why Syria is saying, we have the equipment now, we're going to shoot down your aircraft if you do come into this region. And now the United States, in the mainstream media, this is, obviously you're not getting a lot of this news in the mainstream media, but MSNBC, the piece of trash filth news organization, the whore stream prostitutes are reporting how Obama's getting the last laugh against Putin because Putin was not able to destroy ISIS within 3 months. And they're saying, yeah, Obama, this is just insane. This total out of 1984 script writing insanity by MSNBC going against Putin for trying to get rid of the Syrian rebels and ISIS, showing the effective that he has been made, saying, oh yeah, he hasn't won completely yet. And that's why Obama's, better and right with this strategy. When you will not get this news anywhere else, especially on MSNBC, because lawmakers, even congressmen within our own countries, are launching an official congruent investigation into the allegation that President Barack Obama has deliberately manipulated intelligence reports from Syria and Iraq, allowing the Islamic group to thrive. As we know, Obama has just signed the NDAA, the Defense Authorization Bill, giving $500 million to so-called moderate rebels. As we have documented, a lot of our money, a lot of your taxes that has been given to moderate rebels have actually come into the hands of ISIS. But if you look at some of the so-called moderate rebel groups inside of Syria, they are not only fighting with ISIS, but they're also calling for Sharia law to be imposed inside of Syria. Look at these moderate rebels. They are also sending in mortar rounds into heavily populated civilian areas that are killing civilians indiscriminately. Just a few hours ago, this incident happened. If you look at the U.S.-led coalition, Saudi Arabia has not flown one mission against ISIS in 3 months. Jordan, 4 months. The United Arab Emirates 9 months. If you look at the behavior of the State Department that created the rise of ISIS, you could see the Hillary Clinton Foundation and Bill Clinton Foundation receiving a lot of money from these Middle Eastern countries that are not doing anything against ISIS. When Hillary Clinton was head of the State Department, she was approving weapons deals to these countries. And a lot of these weapons from our supposed allies, from our coalition, are ending up in the hands of ISIS in the region. There's a lot that the mainstream media is keeping away from you that they do not want you to know. They write crappy little articles talking about how Putin hasn't defeated ISIS yet. But if you look at the decisions made by our own very government, you could see the direct collusion of Syrian rebels to get rid of Bashar al-Assad, the main geopolitical goal by the United States that has led to this insane escalation between a U.S.-backed ally, Turkey, and Russia. It is not looking good geopolitically because anything at any moment could spark an incident, and there's many incidences happening all the freaking time. And it's very hard to report this to you, but we are staying as much as we can, looking at all these reports, giving you the news unbiasedly with the sources below so you can fact check everything yourself. This is only going to lead to more escalations. The situation does not look good in any way, shape, or form. And if you've been watching this YouTube channel for a while, you know that this is no surprise to you in any way, shape, or form. I want to thank all the amazing individuals who are giving at least $1 per month, keeping this independent media organization alive so we could provide you this news unbiasedly. We could provide you this news quickly as it's breaking to you like nobody else. Thank you again so much for watching. We're going to have more important developments here for you independently by youtube.com/wearechange. Subscribe. We're going to have a lot more content coming here your way without any corporate or government influence.
wearechange.org. We Are Change on YouTube. Subscribe. Check them out. I have one here from InfoWars, and this one's by Kit Daniels, and this one's Obama concedes to Putin after NATO's support of ISIS exposed. White House stops demanding Assad's removal after news reports reveal West backing ISIS. The Obama administration is no longer publicly asking for regime change in Syria after multiple news reports revealed how NATO and its allies have spent years supporting Islamic jihadists to try and topple Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said he accepted Russia's request that the U.S. let the Syrian people decide Assad's political fate. The United States and our partners are not seeking so-called regime change, Kerry told reporters on Tuesday after meeting President Vladimir Putin. This is a huge concession from the Obama administration, considering the president spent the past several years stating Assad must go. Obama wants regime change. Putin doesn't want regime change. Regime change canceled, as HotAir.com so eloquently stated. But why the sudden shift in public policy? Well, Czech President Milos Zeman recently stated that Turkey is friendly to the Islamic State, and there's truth to that. I think Turkey is indeed a member of NATO, but sometimes behaves as it is more an ally to the Islamic State, Zeman said, as quoted by Czech newspaper Parlamentary Listy. It removes oil from Syria, which finances the Islamic State. Iraq Prime Minister Haider Abadi said nearly the exact same thing. Quote, Turkey promised us that they would stop the entry of terrorists. However, we need more action in order to stop the pumping of terrorists from Turkey into Syria and into Iraq, he stated. Also, the stopping of smuggling of petrol from Syria and Iraq and financing of Daesh, the Arabic name for IS, in a general sense through this illegal trade. And Russia presented evidence of Turkey's theft of oil from Syria using thousands of oil tankers operating on 3 major smuggling routes into Turkey. Quote, one thing is clear, the role that Turkey is playing in this area in many ways destructive, and it's affecting the European security, it's affecting its neighbors. Former Mossad agent Uzi Arad told RT, ultimately it's affecting its own society. A major scandal erupted in Turkey last year when Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoglu was caught shipping arms to ISIS, then attempted to cover it up by ordering a media blackout. Not long after, the Obama administration signed an agreement with Turkey to openly train and arm moderate Syrian rebels, but virtually all the rebels fighting Assad in Syria have pledged allegiance to Islamic State since at least 2013. The Free Syrian Army and the Syrian National Council, the vaunted bulwarks of the moderate opposition, only really exist in hotel lobbies and the minds of Western diplomats. Journalist Ben Reynolds wrote, there is simply no real separation between moderate rebel groups and hardline Salafists allied with Al-Qaeda. Now, I want to kind of step in there because there is a group, and the people that know about the group will go, what about the Kurds? And if you look, the Kurds are mainly been forced into northern Iraq, and they are actively fighting ISIS. But the problem is they rely on NATO's, meaning the U.S. and all these other countries, to bomb these things. They literally had a divide in a province in northern Iraq that they can't get past. They have no air support because the air support's been told not to bomb it, which they recently have, and they allowed the Kurds to go ahead and, fight. Was the pipe, that road that was going into Turkey, taking oil into Turkey, that the Kurds finally were allowed to capture with the help of the air defense. Now, when you look at everything going on, it's basically been proven that we either helped or allowed the oil to get out of Iraq and Syria. There's things that literally all they had to do is, now you may bomb that area. Now you may fire on those enemies. Wasn't that, did we know they were there? We were allowing it. And then, then it comes out that we dropped all these pamphlets giving them plenty of time to get out of the area before we destroyed it. When you have convoys going from town to town and killing people, and you go, we're having a problem attacking ISIS. It's BS. It really is. And just because Russia hasn't finished yet, they made more headway in, 3 days than we made in maybe a year or more? And I'm not a let's go Russia type guy. No, I don't care about Russia. Russia is just another governmental territory. I'm personally about freedom, but I also see that we are creating chaos over there. We're engaged over there. We, as the U.S. government, is engaged over there, creating enemies. And, Ron Paul's talked about it. It's blowback. we will get blowback. The more we intervene in countries, the more enemies we create. I have something here. Mises Institute, Mises.org. Ryan McMacken, with few gun laws, New Hampshire is safer than Canada. Pew recently reported on how the homicide rate in the U.S. has been cut in half over the past 20 years, even as gun ownership has greatly expanded in the U.S. The U.S. public, meanwhile, thinks the murder rate is increasing. What Pew didn't mention is how remarkably low the homicide rate has fallen in some U.S. states. Pew reported FBI murder data up through 2013, but in more recent FBI homicide data, total homicides fell again in 2014, while the homicide rates in some states reached historic lows. In New Hampshire, the homicide rate in 2014 was 0.9 homicides per 100,000, making New Hampshire in 2014 one of the safest places in terms of homicide on the planet. Several other states came in with remarkably low homicide rates as well, with Minnesota reporting a rate of 1.6, Idaho at 2.0, and Iowa at 1.9, rates measured at events per 100,000. U.S. states versus Canadian provinces. Clearly, the places rank among the U.S. states with the lowest homicide rates. But for a broader context, let's look at homicide rates compared among both U.S. states and Canadian provinces. Indeed, the northern United States generally tend to have quite low homicide rates in a global context. There are problems with comparing across national boundaries. For more on that, see below. Within North America, the jurisdictions with the lowest homicide rates include all of New England and Northern Plains states of the U.S. and the Pacific Northwest. Most of Canada reports low rates as well as exceptions of the rural North, where Nunavut territory has the worst homicide rate in both the U.S. and Canada. The blue states are U.S. states. Well, I'm not going to read that. That's about the map. Says here, and yeah, as we also note that 9 U.S. states have homicide rates that are either lower than or the same as, statistically speaking. British Columbia, Manitoba has a murder rate that is statistically the same as or higher than 23 states. So does the United States have a high homicide rate? Well, some parts of the country, including Maryland, South Carolina, Louisiana, and a few states certainly report relatively high homicide rates when compared to many high and middle income countries. And some of those states also have lax gun laws. This should lead us to evaluate what is the lead to these regional issues with homicide. Given there are regional issues and clearly not national ones, however, it's difficult to see why any national mandates would be appropriate. Additionally, if one can point to Canada or the UK or Luxembourg and immediately conclude that gun control in those jurisdictions produce their low homicide rates, why can one not also point to New Hampshire or Oregon or Utah and conclude that their lack of gun controls is the reason for their low homicide rates? This is yet to be explained by gun control advocates. Fewer guns, fewer homicides. when we look at the similarities in homicide rates between some American states and some Canadian provinces, the question we quickly find ourselves asking is, what is it about these areas that make it such low homicide rates? Well, as the anti-gun Brady campaign inadvertently makes clear, there is little apparent connection between homicide rates at state-level gun laws. States with more gun freedom get lower scores. For example, New Hampshire, Vermont, Idaho, and Oregon all of which have among the lowest homicide rates in North America, get Brady campaign scores of D, F, F, and D+, respectively. Almost comically, Maryland and Illinois, which have homicide rates that are much higher, get scores of A- and B, respectively. But to be fair, there are other examples that show a lack of correlation altogether. New York has a relatively low homicide rate, gets a score of A-, while South Carolina, which has a high homicide rate, gets a score of F. Canada, meanwhile, does not have the same level of diversity in gun laws that the USA has among states. Canadian gun laws are dominated by national law, which mandates restrictions on certain weapons nationwide, and there is a national gun registry centralized under the RCMP. All handguns are subject to registration. Nevertheless, at the provincial level, we might note that Quebec is traditionally among the most anti-gun in Canada, while New Hampshire is among the least restrictive states when it comes to guns. In 2014, the two jurisdictions had identical homicide rates. Yet, given the significant legal differences between U.S. and Canadian law, we can't simply point to gun laws as a reason for similar homicide rates between Canada provinces and U.S. states. Other issues might include urbanization, ethnic conflict, median age, and weather. And I'm not going to get into the rest of this. It's a pretty long article, but go check it out at mises.org /blog. Few gun laws, New Hampshire safer than Canada. And it's really interesting, and a lot of times I see it more as the states that are lax on their gun laws, but also have a culture of, a more moral way of handling a gun and gun safety, and a culture of respecting, I think tends to play a big part in that. And when we see what's going on in the Middle East, you got to understand, put a wall up and ban Muslims, and it's not going to help. There's a lot of different issues that play at hand, and one of the main things that plays into it is the constant meddling in the Middle East. And we've definitely increased the way we meddle to the point we really destabilize. And to look at a lot of these candidates, they don't have a problem destabilizing further to accomplish a goal. Now, I have a quick interview. Who benefits from the Syrian war? Manar Mulash discusses. And that's the editor at Mint Press. Ben Swan, truthofmedia.com, Ben Swan on YouTube. Check him out.
You are listening to Joshua Cook of truthofmedia.com.
Guys, I want to thank you so much for tuning in to truthofmedia.com. I'm your host, Joshua Cook. And I had the pleasure to have on the Skype phone line today Manar Mahawish. And you are also the editor of Mint Press News that I've been a fan of for a long time. Manar, thank you so much for being on the show today. I do appreciate it.
Well, good. Thank you. And thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Well, I think it's what you do is very important. Same thing that the reason why we started Truth in Media is there's not a lot of truth in new media right now. There's a lot of bias. There's a lot of corporate interest. And I think it's important for alternative media to really have a voice so that we can really change and really get the truth out so people can really be informed. One of the articles on your website I think is so important, and I had an honor to interview in the past Dr. Nafis Ahmed. He wrote an excellent article. You can find it on mintpressnews.com about the oil interest in Syria. And part of the article I thought was really fascinating was a journalist that he quoted, Jonathan Cook. And in the article, he talks about how Israel is one of the countries that are buying oil from ISIS. Basically, it's being smuggled through Turkey, but it seems that Israel is one of the biggest countries that is buying the oil right now. And so it kind of made me wonder, you talk about ISIS, you talk about the origin of ISIS, but nobody in the media right now is really talking about what is fueling and funding ISIS. And so it begs the question is why don't we put pressure on these countries that are profiting from these oil reserves? Because they're making millions. ISIS, the organization, is making millions of dollars a day. So it just begs the questions, where are our priorities? I want to get your thoughts on that.
Well, Israel has been playing a very dirty role in Syria from the very beginning, and unfortunately the media still hasn't really caught up on it. But thankfully, because of organizations and alternative media like WikiLeaks, we've been able to see leaked State Department and Pentagon documents that show Israel, the United States, Qatar, Turkey, and Egypt, as well as Saudi Arabia, as planning to foment a crisis inside of Syria as early as 2006. And the biggest beneficiary of the crisis, of course, are two main parties. Well, three, I guess, but the first one would be Israel. Israel has been wanting Syria to fall for a very, very long time. One, of course, because of its alliance with Hezbollah and with Iran, and it's funneling weapons to Hezbollah, which is a group that resists Israeli occupation in southern Lebanon. And the second reason being is to exploit the Syrian Golan Heights oil reserves. Israel originally occupied the Golan Heights, in the 1960s, and had to give it back. And so this has been their opportunity in expanding greater Israel. And of course, it's, as on the surface, it sounds like a religious endeavor, but it's really just about expanding land for resources. And so that's really why Israel has been really interested in destabilizing Syria. I mean, it really just comes down to basic economics. And for countries like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Turkey, it also comes down to basic economics. Iran has had the recent sanctions removed, or they will be removed officially, I think this month or next month. And that would mean that Iranian oil and gas markets are just going to explode on the international marketplace. And this really poses a very big threat to Saudi Arabia and Qatar, who have held hegemony over the oil markets, the global oil markets. And so this is all, again, to weaken Iran's influence and to exploit the oil and gas industry inside of Syria. And of course, this goes into the other aspect of the story, which is also to weaken Russia's influence over gas markets and oil markets that it has through Iran and Syria. So it's just like this big weave, this big web of just so many things taking place. But that's really what it's all about in a nutshell.
I think you would agree with me that ISIS, basically is the creation of the West, and they're just being used as puppets right now with the different players in that region. But it's very frustrating to have this information and not hear it being repeated in the mainstream media. I think that's what mid-press news is so important to really get the message out. Another thing is, there's a lot of complaints from the right that the Muslim community doesn't speak out against ISIS enough. But I noticed on your website there are groups that have been speaking out. The problem is the mainstream media just doesn't report these groups. I was wondering if you could touch that, especially in light of the attack in California, the attack in France. But I wanted to get your take on that. As far as the Muslim community, what are they saying? What are these groups saying? Are they speaking out against ISIS?
Well, I find it really ironic that these groups would say that, because the biggest victims to ISIS terror have actually been Muslims in the Middle East. Muslim and Christian Arabs have been suffering because of ISIS. And in fact, Muslims and Christians in Syria and in Iraq have united and have formed militias to stand up against ISIS. We've actually, been on the ground and have given these people a voice where the mainstream media has totally failed. And in the United States, there have been protests, there have been movements, there have been hashtags, and organizations formed by, thousands upon thousands of Muslim Americans to condemn groups like ISIS. And most importantly, they have come out to speak out against this Wahhabist ideology that is being pushed out by the Saudi government. And of course, it's, like you said, ISIS really suits the political agenda of these nations. Well, talk about Saudi Arabia. I mean, ISIS really fits into this divide and conquer rule strategy of Saudi Arabia, which is to destabilize these countries through civil strife. And now we have the world's largest Islamic organization, which is about a group of 50 million strong Sunnis, who have come out in Indonesia, Indonesia is the home of the largest Muslim population in the world. And they've launched a global anti-extremism campaign to speak out against ISIS. The problem is that, a lot of these, people on the right they're going to people like Donald Trump or Sarah Palin or Fox News, and, who are parroting these points that, where are the Muslims? Where are the Muslims? Well, even those organizations don't give voice to those Muslims. So they are there and they're everywhere. It's just a matter of, are we doing our due diligence to listen and look for that alternative perspective and to see where are those Muslims that are speaking out? They're everywhere that you can look.
What's your thoughts on alternative media right now? Are sites like yours, sites like truthinmedia.com, are we getting through? Are we making a difference?
I definitely think we are, and I have a lot of hope because in the past, I would say, 5 to 7 years, there has been an alternative and independent media renaissance taking place with organizations like ours and like yours, and prominent independent journalists and even corporate journalists completely leaving the corporate world and speaking up, along with whistleblowers starting their own organizations, kind of coming out onto the surface to speak up against the corporate, war machine that exists. And this is really a result of the consolidation of the media that took place between the 1980s and the 1990s up to 2001. I mean, people were used to having an array of diverse voices for such a long time. I mean, the media used to be controlled by or owned by 50 corporations. Now it's owned by just 6. So 6 corporations literally control over, 90% of what Americans see, hear, and read. And so people are really thirsty for that alternative perspective, and they're really tired of hearing the same talking points that really drive fear and make, that try to divide us and make us live in fear and hate each other. We are making a huge impact. I mean, last night I actually gave this really big presentation to a group of people who, were a group of, local government officials, mayors, city council members, and school board members. And I spoke about war. I spoke about the rise of hate and the rise of, the corporate war machine. And to my great surprise, they stood up in a standing ovation and they said, "Thank you. We know little bits and pieces, but nobody has ever been able to bring this information together for us. And we appreciate that. People are so disenfranchised from the media. They're just thirsty for that alternative perspective, that one that works to unite people and to bring people together, not one that divides us."
Yeah, and I think that's very important to do. And unfortunately, just listening to all the presidential candidates in both parties, there's no talk of unity, unfortunately. It's
no, not at all.
It's planned, divide and conquer. But I appreciate so much for your work, and I definitely would love to have you back on the show. And thank you so much for your perspective today.
Thank you, Josh. I appreciate it.
Truthofmedia.com, Ben Swan on YouTube. Go check him out, subscribe. That was Joshua Cook, truthofmedia.com. When we look at divide and conquer, it's worked so well that things like the UN, NATO, and Obama just bypassing Congress, any president being able to just, ignore Congress and just go, well, I'm going to get my authority from the UN. We're going to cooperate with the UN. We're going to do military operations, but not call it war and go along with it. So it's so much that even here in America with the Black Lives Matter, you just see so much hate. And again, I think that's what people like Trump, Bush, all of them like to play off of the fear. And one thing we've heard out of Trump is closing the internet down and basically censoring speech. This is a fascist idea. Now, in that debate, Rand Paul actually, got Trump on that one. InfoWars Steve Watson covered it. Rand Paul slams Trump internet closure plan would violate First Amendment. In defending America, we can not lose what America stands for. While for the most part, the GOP debate last night was a snooze fest, back and forth between the Dulles candidates to grace a podium, Rand Paul once again stood out as a clear and conscious voice of reason whenever he made a point. One such point in question was regarding Donald Trump's professed plan to close the internet to combat terrorism. Trump declared that terrorists recruit online and that he is one of the opinion that extremists should not be able to use our internet. I don't want them using our internet to take our young, impressionable youth and watching the media talking about how they're masterminds These are masterminds. They shouldn't be using the word mastermind, Trump said. Trump further proposed working with our brilliant people from Silicon Valley to figure out a way that ISIS cannot do what they are doing. Rand Paul took issue with Trump's suggestions, saying that to restrict the internet would constitute getting rid of the First Amendment. Paul added that anyone who believes in the Constitution would have reservations about supporting Trump. Rand Paul, Sean Hannity at Rand Paul, to close the internet would violate the Constitution and would specifically violate the First Amendment. Trump replied that he wanted to infiltrate their internet, yet the crowd sided with Paul, and some even booing Trump's proposed censorship. Trump then declared he cannot fathom that those booing him do not support infiltrating the communications of terrorists. As far as the internet is concerned, we're not talking about closing the internet. I'm talking about parts of Syria, parts of Iraq, where ISIS is spotting it. Trump qualified. In a related exchange, Paul slammed Mark Rubio's pledge to allow the NSA to keep bulk trawling Americans' phone records. We are not any safer through a bulk collection of all Americans' records. In fact, I think we're less safe, Paul said. We get so distracted by all the information, we're not spending enough time getting specific immigration, specific information on terrorists, he added. In defending America, we cannot lose what America stands for. Today is the Bill of Rights anniversary. I hope we will remember that and cherish that in the fight on terrorism, Paul concluded. Excuse me. Now, we've seen glimpses of censorship on the internet. Censoring any communications on the internet for Syria, Iraq, or anything also stops your message of freedom or your message of morals or whatever to reach those people. It stops the flow of information. When you say that you should make the internet illegal for someone is basically saying you should make being able to go to the library or, read books a crime. When the internet has become the library for the world, they're like, yeah, but people might use it for bad things. They might go out in public and do bad things. You can't stop people from doing bad things. Stop pretending you can. All you can do is defend yourself from those bad things happening to you. To put precautions in for yourself, your family. Remember never to sink to those lows. There's things you can do. And it makes society as a whole a better place when you pay attention to your own needs, your own protection, instead of running around here thinking you can manage everybody else's. Okay. Let me see if I can find it. When we look at measures that a lot of these politicians and these candidates for president push for, and I've talked about Trump. I think he's a fascist. I think people like Bernie Sanders, which, he's self-proclaimed socialist. It's all a authoritarian communist or communistic type governing. And it really strips your freedoms away. You become a cog in the machine no matter what the machine does. And if you don't go along with it, then why have you around? And that's basically how those governments get. And the more that they're not checked, and that authoritarian grab is not checked, the more like, North Korea, maybe. So, I wanted to play this one. It was from Mises Media on YouTube, Mises.org. And this one is Yuri Maltsev, Socialism, Fascism, and Trumpism. And this was in honor of the 24th anniversary of the Soviet Union's collapse. Dr. Yuri Maltsev, a senior fellow here at Mises Institute and a professor of economics at Carthage College in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Yuri is famous for having been a Soviet economist during the Gorbachev era. Excuse me. And defecting to the United States, Yuri and Jeff discuss Trumpism, the Bernie Sanders phenomenon, and Western progressivism, silly and enduring love affair with socialism. They also discuss what the often misused terms socialism and fascism really mean.
Our guest this weekend is our old friend, Dr. Yuri Maltsev, a senior fellow here at the Mises Institute and a professor of economics at Carthage College in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Of course, Yuri is famous for having been a Soviet economist during the Gorbachev era and defecting to the United States. Yuri's here to talk to us about Trumpism, about the Bernie Sanders phenomenon, and Western progressive silly and enduring love affair with socialism, and what those often misused terms themselves, socialism and fascism, really mean. Stay tuned for a great interview with Yuri Maltsev. Well, Dr. Yuri Maltsev, welcome back. It's great to talk to you once again on Mises Weekends.
It's very nice to be back.
The last time we spoke, which is about a year and a half ago now, we talked about this silly sort of enduring romance that Westerners and Americans in particular continue to have with socialism. Now, since then, we've seen the rise of the Bernie Sanders phenomenon. So I'd love to get your thoughts on Bernie and the crowds he's having and the impact he's making.
Yes, it's very sad to see that right now the United States is kind of facing a choice between, I would say, socialism and national socialism. So it's we have candidates of both parties who are attracting the most active part of population, either Marxist-Leninists like Bernie Sanders. Not many people realize that 15 years ago he published an article in which he demanded 100% tax on incomes above $100 million. So in that case, he is very close to the ideas of Mr. Obama's father, Barack Obama Sr., who also suggested in 1965 that the state should impose a 100% of tax on everybody, however, providing people with everything they need. Mr. Sanders, he looks kind of benevolent, but from another hand, with the ideas that he has, definitely these ideas can only result in destruction of our economy, culture, and in the future in mass murder. The Christmas Eve day is an anniversary, will be an anniversary of the dissolution of the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union was a very good example of the country which was glued together only by fear, because ideas of Bernie Sanders were exactly the same ideas which ruined the Soviet Union. If you will impose socialism on any country, you're completely destroying any incentives to work, any incentives to do anything. So then you need to apply violence and mass murder to make people to do what you want them to do. And no matter whether you are looking nice, like Mr. Sanders, or like looking pretty bright like our president does, then the logic of that system would turn you into a mass murderer. First Soviet government was the government of intellectuals. They have people like Trotsky who would write poetry in French. Lenin could speak 7 languages and could play piano very well. All others were also very prominent scholars and philosophers in their field. But then the logic of that system, which does not have any incentives, turned them all into mass murderers and serial political killers.
Well, it's interesting. As libertarians, we look at socialism and communism as force. We look at them as systems that inevitably lead to death and destruction and violence. But our progressive friends don't see it that way, right? They would say, well, look at Norway, Dr. Maltsev, look at Sweden. These are not necessarily violent authoritarian regimes, and gee whiz, in those contexts, socialism can work.
Yes, well, I think that von Mises, he put it very right. He said socialism is not an economic system. It is a revolt against economics. Socialism is a simple system of commands, simple system of management. If you will look, however, at Norway and Sweden, you would not find that they are socialist countries. I would say Sweden today is probably economically more free than United States. Because what is socialism? Socialism means government ownership. Any government is a socialist institution. So from that perspective, the smaller the government, the better it is, the less socialism we have. And if you will look at, say, Sweden, then government ownership is very small. Regulatory mechanism is much smaller than we have in the United States. So and besides that, these are Sweden and Norway, these are countries probably the size of a little bit more than Wisconsin, maybe Wisconsin and Iowa combined and whatnot. And they were, until recently, they were kind of ethnically and religiously homogeneous communities. And so these are not examples that it would work. If you will look in Denmark, for example, Bernie Sanders all the time would refer to Denmark as a socialist paradise. And the Prime Minister of Denmark recently, he blasted Sanders, saying that just don't badmouth us. We are not socialists. We're a free market economy.
It's interesting you bring up the regulatory burden. In the U.S., we tend to think of socialism only in terms of mass redistribution of wealth, right? People in the U.S., especially people on the left, don't see the regulatory state as at least socialist, if not completely socialist.
Regulatory mechanism is the same socialism as the nationalization of property. I mean, if you will look at the National Socialism regime and Nazi regime in Germany, that was a regulatory state which still was kind of acknowledged property rights, but these property rights were phony. These property rights would be the same as you have property rights, say, on wetlands in the United States. So the government would tell you when to open, when to close, whom to hire, whom to fire. Everything was in place. Lenin himself, Lenin was, I would say, kind of pleasantly surprised that his revolution was so quick and he achieved everything in one fell swoop. Because before that, he thought that it will be a long process. And at first, he said, we should impose regulations so capitalists would do what we want them to do for us.
Well, having lived in the former Soviet Union and come to America, give me your thoughts on the current state of the American right wing, and in particular, what do you think of Trumpism?
Trumpism, yes, Trumpism. I think that this is the same kind of phenomenon that we had in Europe in 1920s and 1930s. It is a reaction, and I would say predictable reaction against the wildly, radically socialist agenda of Obama administration. And there's people are just scared, and when people are scared, then anyone who is promising them everything is doing very well. I would say that Trump definitely I don't see him having any chances except putting Hillary in place in the White House. But from another hand, it's very troubling from another hand phenomenon, because Trump is not a friend of liberty. He is not a constitutionalist. His major ideas are unknown to me. He is just playing on people's fears. But people do have these pretty legitimate fears, especially if you will look at immigration. I'm an immigrant myself. I am all for free immigration. However, immigration today is completely different than it was before. Now, immigration is a huge welfare program which is run by the federal government with a bill of several $1 billion a year. So it's not that this hurled masses, wretched masses from overseas who were prosecuted are trying to get into the United States. No, the people are being picked up according to the standards of social, ethnic, political engineering of the federal government and brought here at your expense. And, for example, Tsarnaev brothers, who bombed Boston Marathon, these people, they consumed about $120,000 in all kind of welfare schemes to kill people who paid for them at this tragic event in Boston. So if you will remember history of the United States, many people from Britain came to the United States as indentured slaves even. Indentured servants. So they incurred a lot of costs themselves. That was their choice. Today, if we are going there and picking up whom we want and bringing them here just to dilute people that Mr. Obama doesn't like, I think that this is a travesty. And Mr. Trump, he is making this point, and that's why people do support him.
Well, turning back for a moment to Sanders, it's not just young people and millennials or Occupy Wall Street types at his rallies. We see older, baby boomers with ponytails too. Is America just so rich that even people who ought to know better, people who are in their 50s and 60s, they've just never experienced what socialism or what hardship or what a planned economy is like, and thus they don't get what they're really advocating?
Jeff, I hate to say that, but I think that even the demise of the Soviet Union contributed to that. Soviet Union was kind of like a village drunk or village idiot, and people would look at that and see, no, socialism does not work. It's impossible that in a country which is spreading to 11 time zones, people cannot find bread or butter or other things that we enjoy in the United States. Today it's gone. Today nobody can point anywhere. And then this old social envy, old socialist ideas, they are coming back. And Bernie Sanders, if not many people, at least not our mass media, is telling us that Bernie Sanders, not only he is a socialist, he is also national socialist. To that extent, he can be very well compared to Mr. Trump, because Bernie Sanders, if you remember, he was trashing Koch brothers and everybody else on the right for the free borders concept. His point was that this these are these greedy capitalists who want to bring people to exploit them in the United States. And nothing like that. And so he's very bad news. But I'm also, maybe I'm wrong, hopefully I'm wrong, but I think that he has only one role in this campaign, is to provide a good background for Mrs. Clinton.
Do people ever truly change their minds? In other words, if I went to the former Soviet Union today, let's say I went to Moscow, and I found some people who are 80 or 90 years old, wouldn't some of them say, despite all the evidence to the contrary, that the collectivism works and that the old system was better and that they don't believe in free markets and capitalism, even today?
Jeff, you wouldn't believe it. When I was last time in Cuba, I met some professors from University of Montana who would be looking at all this man-made disaster, which is Cuba, and they would say, isn't it beautiful? There are so many intellectuals who would go to Soviet Union today, to Russia today, and they would visit these memorials of these death concentration camps where people were exterminated by millions. And they would say, no, this is not true. Or they would not say anything but return back and would praise socialism again. Sure, there's a lot of people, older people, who would, it's kind of human nature. I remember I spent 1 month in the Soviet army, and I wasn't thinking that I would survive that month. It was the most horrible month in my life at that time, if I remember it. From my perspective today, it was kind of fun. It was interesting experience, which is over me. And many older people in the Soviet Union, because their youth was I would say wasted by the socialist regime, but that's the only thing they knew at that time. Some of them, they remember it fondly, and that's why they embrace people who are promising them something for nothing, the same way as people do embrace this kind of promises in the United States, unfortunately.
Well, if you look at today's government in Russia, it's no longer communist. How would you describe it? Would you say it's oligarchic? How would you describe Putin's government?
Again, von Mises, he provided us with a great insight. He said there are two patterns of socialism. One is German pattern, in which all the entrepreneurs, all the owners become just managers for the government. And there is a Soviet pattern where the whole country is run like a post office general, run by postmaster. So then everything is owned by the state. So they got rid of this Soviet pattern. But I think that today's government embraced this German pattern because there's no free market. It's a huge regulatory state. It's a huge kind of place. Some people call it crony capitalism. I think crony capitalism is an oxymoron. There's no such thing. It's a crony socialism. And this is a crony socialism when the people around the throne, around Mr. Putin, people who are his friends, his buddies, and loyal to him, they're enjoying unbelievable standard of living, unheard of in Russia, unheard of even under Tsars. So this is very far from being free market. Having said that, however, I believe that even German pattern is much better than Soviet pattern, because even ordinary Russians enjoy today much higher standard of living than they did under communism.
So still an improvement in a sense.
It is, yeah, because I would say under Gorbachev, they reached absolute bottom. There was no way to go lower.
When you worked as an economist in Russia, and Gorbachev was president before you had left, correct? Mm-hmm. You spoke in our last interview about having read The Road to Serfdom. Did anyone in Russia at the highest levels in politics and economics, were people reading Mises and Hayek? Were they aware of them? Did they have some understanding of what we would call Austrian economics?
Well, I would say that the people like me, and people, I would say, somewhere like in the middle of this pyramid, were very interested, intellectuals, very interested in exploring von Mises and exploring Hayek and exploring Ayn Rand and exploring all ideas of freedom of George Orwell, Solzhenitsyn, whomever they could find. From another hand, people on the very top, like Mr. Gorbachev, I don't think that he ever read Road to Serfdom or was even interested in doing that. And that was the funniest thing I heard from him, that we had the chief economic advisor, the advisor to Gorbachev, was Abel Aganbegyan. And Abel Aganbegyan, the biggest economist in the world, we called him because he was maybe 500 pounds. And he used to say all the time that what we need now is to build Swedish model of socialism. And Gorbachev, when he heard that the second time, he said, Abel, where would you get all the Swedes? And that was exactly right. So these people didn't know. I mean, most people thought that still socialism is good. It's just Stalin is bad, that the Gulag is bad, that murdering people in the middle of the night is bad. But there's this wonderful image of socialism, which I think Mr. Obama is sharing. I think that Mr. Sanders is way to the left of Mr. Obama. I think if Mr. Obama we can qualify as kind of a Marxist, then Mr. Sanders is a true Leninist.
We only have time for one last question. Let me ask you this. You've lived in a former Soviet Union. You've taught in America. You've been all around the world. Do you think one's inclination to be collectivist in outlook or libertarian in outlook, do you think that's nature or nurture? Do you think there's potentially a genetic component that leads us to be more libertarian or more statist?
I would say that it is social rather than biological, in a sense that I think that educational system that we have in the United States, the culture elites, they are promoting collectivism. If you will look what public schools, what universities are doing, if you will look at whatever predominant culture, the culture is that we are responsible for all the bad things in the world. People, a lot of my students, they feel guilty for no reason. And this is very sad because collectivists are exploiting this. And very sad for me to see that because I am too old already to defect again.
No, we'll have to keep you right here where you are, Yuri. Dr. Yuri Maltsev, thank you so much for your time and a great interview. Ladies and gentlemen, have a great weekend.
Now, I've been saying this for a while. Many others have about the public school system, the universities. It really is a collectivist type attitude, pushing socialism and wondering why they're not happy. It's because we're forgetting the individual. And even when you disagree with things, if you can allow for the free exercise thereof, whatever someone, how they want to live their personal life, when that stops being a obstacle, then creativity is able to, prosper because we're not worried about the other little crap, the crap that doesn't help society further. A lot of times it's a lead by example has the most effective means. So we have to really, take a different look at society before we go voting for people like Trump or any Bernie Sanders, because really they're going for a extreme. And extreme means even more divided, because whether you go full socialist or full fascist, you're going for authoritarian government that starts cracking down. And if there is the ability left to vote for the opposite party, guess what? They're just going to further their agenda along without really regressing any laws, unless it furthers their agenda to grab power. And they tend to get a little bit better at it every time, because look at what Obama's done. It's what Constitution, what Bill of Rights, what do those things mean when, he can do what he does unchallenged by Congress. And really there is no challenge to what he wants to do. Well, we could go through the whole ceremony of Congress, voting for this, and well, if you don't, guess what? I'll just write an executive order. I don't care. And well, if we have a constitution, he's not upholding it. Bring this article up for the end of the broadcast here. I wanted to cover it. I don't know if it's going to pop up in time. When we get more authoritarian government, when we get more opposite of what freedom is, we start seeing things that, well, we've seen in old war movies where the military comes in and grabs a family, kind of like the old MTV little commercials that they play that represent Nazi Germany. Infowars.com, California gun instructor visited by police after shopping for ammo. Police interrogate Sikh woman training to be a cop after she asked about ammo. A female gun instructor in California says she was shocked to be visited by police after asking about rifle rounds at a nearby store. Fremont resident Slim Sangha says cops unexpectedly knocked on her door last Friday, 2 days after she asked about purchasing 8 boxes of ammo for AR-15 at Dick's Sporting Goods. Police told Sangha an employee at the store called to report her as suspicious even though she never bought the ammo. Sangha, a certified firearms instructor, is in the process of joining the Los Angeles Police Department. Thinks she was singled out due to her skin color and the heightened sense of apprehension surrounding Muslims. I don't know if it's because of my skin color or the way I look. I'm Sikh. I'm Indian. I was born and raised in America. I'm a citizen here, saying I told NBC Bay Area. I'm not a Muslim, but even if I were, that's no reason to call police to my home instantly. Police defended their visit to Sangha's house, arguing they needed to follow up on tips following the San Bernardino terror attacks earlier this month. I feel like I was racially profiled, she said. I've had friends buy bulk ammo, and they never had police show up at their door. Dick's Sporting Goods did not respond to NBC Bay Area request for comment. And when you look at Trump, this is the type of rhetoric and bigotry type rhetoric that he's spreading, even if he doesn't realize he's spreading it. That is what he's spreading. One last one. Homeland TV show inspired terror hoax cost strapped California taxpayers $29 million. Similar threat received in New York dismissed as implausible. Schools in Los Angeles reopened Wednesday following a terror hoax that prompted officials to cancel classes at 640,000 students. We believe that our schools are safe and we can reopen schools in Los Angeles United School District tomorrow morning, School Board President Steve Zimmer said on Tuesday evening during a news conference. The shutdown of the nation's second largest public education system cost the state of California $29 million. An email sent to Los Angeles and New York school officials on Monday threatened the use of nerve gas and pressure cooker bombs. The mention of nerve gas is believed to be a reference to a recent episode of Homeland, a Showtime television series about an Al-Qaeda prisoner of war and a CIA officer suffering from bipolar disorder. New York declined to shut down its school system in response to the email, which warned students at every school in New York City school district will be massacred mercilessly, and there is nothing you can do to stop it. NYPD Police Commissioner Bill Bratton dismissed the threat as implausible. It was so generic, so outlandish, and posed numerous school districts simultaneously. That, in fact, it would be a huge disservice to our nation to close our school system, he said. So we have California just going completely, locked down, shut down the schools, while New York's like, you couldn't do that. It's implausible. Now, you can look at it both ways. You can go, well, New York was taking a risk. Or you can go, California was overreacting. And there's probably truth somewhere in the middle. I do want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. Don't forget to go to ucy.tv. Scroll down to the bottom. There's a little Amazon tab. Click that Amazon button, and it will take you to Amazon, where you get the same great prices, same great shipping rates on all their products. And at the same time, it helps ucy.tv. And by supporting UCY, you support all the hosts here that have a platform that they're able to get information and news out that mainstream media will not cover. Sometimes you have to take it in your own hands and get news out that, you're not going to see on mainstream media. And UCY has given us a platform to do that. And there's also a support UCY tab at the top at ucy.tv. And you can donate. One thing I always tell people to do, it's really the most sensible thing you can possibly do, and that's just to prepare for whether it be a economic collapse, a natural disaster, or a societal collapse. Take a little time to prepare and at least put some steps in place to ensure your safety in times of crisis. And one thing I do is I buy a lot of my stuff from My Patriot Supply. They got good non-GMO seed vaults that you can buy so you can grow your own food. They also have herbs that for cooking. You have medicinal herbs for healing purposes. Check them out. They also got water filtration and a lot of gear that'll help you get through a situation. And check out their food supplies too. If you go to antityrannynews.com/mypatriot, it'll take you right to My Patriot Supply. And at the same time, you're also helping out alternative media like antityrannynews.com. And again, thank you all for tuning in, and stay tuned here on ucy.tv. There are some great broadcasts coming up after this, Continual Condition. And don't forget to go like antityrannynews.com on Facebook. Go facebook.com/antityranny. Thanks again.